Hey, welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high resistance, low noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. I'd like to open the show today by making sure everybody understands that using their tests to find their ghost does not make their ghost real, nor does it make you a ghostbuster. And I want to explain that in a little more detail just at the beginning. I'm not going to go really in depth, but it has occurred to me that my graphic has not been sufficiently simplified in quite some time that a lot of people might not have any idea what this image behind me even represents. And the same goes with this one. I've been saying it's for all the marbles because this is for the grandchildren of Earth, and trying to emphasize for you to think about it on longer time horizons, longer time scales, to really understand, try to understand why there would be a fake anti-vax movement in the first place. All these stories from these wacky people on the far right and the far left about all these conspiracy theories. Why would a military, industrial, multi-government operation need a fake anti-vax movement? Why would one need to be tried out? Why would one need to be rehearsed on a smaller scale before being executed on a larger scale on the real mark? And if the real mark was America and the rehearsal was in the UK, then are we being played by the UK? Are we being played by people loyal to the City of London, the Crown? I don't know. But I do know for sure that there's no good explanation for Andrew Wakefield and Polly Tommy. There's no good explanation for their almost catastrophic lack of progress in their messaging, a catastrophic lack of progress in their ability to change anything in society or to get any message out. The idea that after so many decades of fighting, so many billboards, they've come to rise and resist people over profits, truth over lies, and courage over fear. It's remarkable. And so I really also want you to understand a little bit more about why endemicity is such a magnificent myth. Why talking about endemicity as a process and also as an endpoint or a result is an enchantment. It's an acceptance of this phenomenon just based on the fact that we're telling you what it is. It's no different really than them telling you that there is an autism spectrum disorder and you need to do the requisite learning in order to understand what that is. And these are all myths that can really only be dispelled by students that have worked hard enough to be able to sit at the table with their teachers. And there are very few of those students anymore. There are very few students who have studied things with love and with passion and with genuine interest in knowing. The point is that you got to be a student long enough to understand how persistence pays off in the end, and how all the wasted hours and pain that you put in pays off in the end. You don't know what that's like until many failures. And in order to achieve the kind of understanding of this myth that you need to achieve in order to escape, you have to necessarily pass through all of these stages of realization, because they're already there in the public consciousness, in the subconscious of every other person in the world, because they've been put there on purpose, because the uniform messaging on social media and on mainstream media. I always need to remind myself of how much of this, what we assume to be a consensus brought about by a bunch of thinking people, is actually a consensus that can be and should be assumed to be possibly manufactured out of whole cloth with a combination of lies and messaging. And so, starting from that perspective, it has been it's easier for me than most to start at that perspective with biology because I've studied it for so long. Somebody who's worked on carpentry their whole life and then finds out that there's a whole bunch of people pretending to be carpenters out there, but they're really not carpenters, and you can figure it out if you really listen to them. For a carpenter to really go back to the basics wouldn't be that hard. For you or me, who's never, beyond using a table saw safely a few times in high school, I'm not a carpenter. And so if you told me that there are a bunch of people that are faking it out there, it would take me a lot of work to get to the point where I would be able to say, yeah, I guess I see it is really a crafty grift they got going on there. And so for me, I feel like I'm in a lucky position because at some point for a long time, I think these people grossly underestimated my previous mastery of general biology as a teacher and as a thinker and as a child. Because that's the trick. They were coming at a kid who was a bird watcher and a snake collector and a repeat Merck manual reader. I used to check the Merck manual out of the Cadott Public Library. The Merck manual is the veterinary manual that all the vets use. It's just this book with a lot of marked indices, and you can look up anything and read about all the diseases and all the farm animals. And I actually used to carry that around in my backpack as I dreamed about being a veterinarian. For a long time, that was what I was going to do. And then I was going to be a marine biologist, and then I was told that was even worse. And then I settled on doctor, and suddenly all the adults in the world said right answer, and I stuck to that for quite some time, just not understanding what had happened and why I was answering that question with that answer. I don't know what to tell you, friends. I really don't, but I do think that we are at such a crucial point in human history, a crucial point in American history, a crucial point in your own history, where you can finally realize that you not only have responsibility over your actions and your what you do with the rest of your life going forward. You have very much sole responsibility for that, but you have an opportunity to act in a way that could benefit your kids, benefit your brother's kids or your sister's kids, benefit your community, and benefit Americans in generations to come that would otherwise not be free if we don't act now. And so endemicity is this idea that something, for example, released from a petri dish, if it has the right combination of bases, like a furin cleavage site or some HIV inserts in the spike protein, that it could be the most contagious virus in human history, and in less than 5 years go from being in a few stalls of a Wuhan market to most of the white-tailed deer in North America, most of the zoo animals around the world, and most of the humans have had it more than 3 times, some of them. And so this is a pretty gregarious RNA sequence, a pretty amazing RNA sequence. We should want to know every single detail about this sequence that allows this phenomenon to happen. But endemicity is the idea, and remember this very clearly, endemicity is the idea that there are other signals back there that we presume also started in a mud puddle or in an animal stall or in a whatever, and then spread through the entire human population to stay there forever. Endemicity is something that we use to describe other viruses. Those viruses are endemic, and the word means that it started from a point and then became a background. And that is a phenomenon that must be accepted like the Big Bang or like evolution from a single bacteria. You have to accept it because there is no empirical proof of any kind to support such a miraculous / ridiculous idea. And yet all of virology is based on the idea that if you use some genetic tools that have been made cheaper and higher fidelity by the endless development of the Human Genome Project, you can find signals in nature which represent endemic signals, signals that started as a signal or a few hundred RNA molecules and are now an inestimable number of RNA molecules of the same class and sequence floating in the background. That's what endemicity is. And understand that in all of these papers and in all of these documentaries and all of these Hollywood movies, there's always somebody in there who's going to say the word once, even if it's only about racism being endemic. And this concept is as enchanting as the idea of a video going viral or an idea going viral. That's not how it happens. It's programmed in. They want you to believe that it's a spontaneous thing that occurs on social media because social media is a spontaneous thing. And so the background that I'm talking about is an irreducibly complex background because there are bacteria. And I should really be able to stop right there because every surface, every atmosphere you're in, every water you've ever been in, any chair you've ever sat on, every bathroom you've ever been in has probably what is adequately described as an inestimable number of and variety of bacteria. If you think and believe that these scientists and biologists who say that we don't even know how many, we don't have all the insects in the book yet, we don't have all the plants in the book yet, how the hell do you think we have all the bacteria in the book yet then? Of course we don't. The ocean is a source of endless diversity from which we could never hope to adequately estimate. That's the reason why Craig Ventner is out there on a big boat just trying to sample all the DNA he can read. I think it is really important to understand that the PCR tests that we use in academia, I used to use in academia to show something is in present, like a particular nicotinic receptor is present in a brain sample or not. A very small brain sample that you had reason to believe might have a specific subtype of nicotinic receptor, and then you make single primer pairs nested to fit these different subtypes of nicotinic receptors, and then you run all of those primers on those samples and they come up differentially for different samples. The only thing reviewers would allow me to do is do a plus or minus or a plus plus or a minus minus. They would not allow me to say that there was none. And that included controls for other subtypes. It in control positive controls that overlapped all of them. And all of those things were required to be shown in the supplementary figures. Just to go plus plus or minus minus, not yes or no, not a cycle number. Although we were getting cycle numbers, we were doing quantitative PCR. We were doing many replicates to show that the quantitative PCR occurred roughly at the same cycle so that we were getting consistent results. We had to do it in triplicate, and then we could still only go plus plus or minus minus or plus or minus. These people were trying to tell you that cycles matter in single with one set of primers that was specific for, I guess, one protein, but such a short sequence could be specific for any number of the irreducibly complex background signals that come from bacteria. But don't forget, also bacteriophages. That might be 10 times or 100 times more hot signal than the bacteria that are already inestimably dense in the background. Impossible to differentiate from or to do an adequate control for. But all these PCR tests that were released in 2020 were not specific for any one thing in the background, and they didn't have to be. All they had to be was something. that they said was red but was already there. And now you convert something that's already there into a new signal and it's going everywhere. Wow, we found a new deadly car. And it's this special model of Toyota, and it's got really special wheels on the front, and it's also got inserts in the engine. And so you got to look in your garage, and we're going to search everybody that ever parks at a hospital, and if they have rubber wheels on their tires or any other if they have a leather covered steering wheel, then we're going to just consider them positive for this new dangerous car, because the car is so dangerous. We would rather have false positives than false negatives. All these arguments benefit these yo-yos who wanted to and very successfully rolled out a non-specific PCR test in what? Concordance with a anticipated rise in all-cause mortality, right? That's what this is. Sorry, I didn't see I stopped that. And so you have an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality here that they timed perfectly, that Fauci knew would be timed perfectly, that the people who work at the Human Genome Project knew would be timed perfectly, because it's very likely that this whole pandemic exercise was just part and parcel for the same Department of Energy top-level security, national security priority, the Human Genome Project. And look where we are in 2025. You have that giant top of that pyramid that's costing us so much money. It's bankrupting Social Security, bankrupting Medicaid, and the ballooning national debt now just seems to happen to coincide with this too.
Stop lying!
And so that's what you see here. It's an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality. That thing rose up from decades ago, and they timed this silliness perfectly. That's why they needed control of the FDA now, because the FDA is the only governmental organization with any mandate to go back and look at the safety and effectivity of medical devices in 2020 and show that there were no effective medical devices in 2020. They were all bogus. More importantly, the FDA is the only organization that's tasked with regulating all of these things that are just in the way. It's just in the way. The FDA is just in the way. It's regulating what's on the label and the promises made on the label, and that's a problem for them. If they're going to admit to you that, we're at the limit of what we can figure out with mouse studies. The beagles, we don't really need them anymore. And, monkeys were never, they're just so costly and from all sides that, it would just be easier if everybody would accept that you're going to have to be experimental animals. You're just going to have to let us inject some things, and sometimes it's going to go wrong. But if you let us keep track of stuff, we'll minimize it in the coming generations. And if you're at the table of technocrats making that choice, then all you got to do is come up with a narrative where you don't ever have to really tell people that. A narrative about a novel virus that killed millions of people, but millions more were saved from a not perfect but pretty good vaccine. And another one could come again, so get ready. We're going to keep trying to update this stuff and make sure that everything is safe and effective. So they took that anticipated rise in all-cause mortality and they sculpted it using murder and lies. And those sophisticated lies are pretty, for at least doctors, it should be really simple. Anybody that was given supplementary oxygen during 2020 and 2021 and subsequently died without leaving the hospital, I think should be assumed to have been injured by the pure oxygen. The ARDS, if that's what ended up happening, classified as COVID pneumonia, and then not treated with antibiotics, those are all murders. And every doctor and hospitalist should be reflecting on what they did or what their staff did to identify if that pattern took place in their hospital. And if there did, they should put their big boy pants on or their big woman pants on and frickin' tell the truth. That's murder. And if they ventilated people after they complained about pain from supplementary oxygen that they were given when they came into the hospital, that's also murder. If they didn't treat any other septic, urinary tract infection or pneumonia or whatever without using antibiotics, that's murder. Poor use of steroids is another way they could murder people because, as Robert Malone admitted with Paul Cottrell on some weirdo podcast with no viewers in August of 2021, dexamethasone is a hammer for the immune system. It's a great way to get people out of the hospital and back to the care home and not have to treat them anymore. But one of the worst signals here in America that allowed this murderous story to be told is this opioid death problem. And how it reduced all-cause mortality? No. How it reduced life expectancy. All-cause mortality was gonna go up. You see, there's no need to explain that. That was gonna go up. What you need to explain is why certain causes of death went up. Certain causes of death that we've had under control for decades and got under control again suddenly, abruptly at the end of 2022. There's just too much evidence here, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a paramilitary, multinational kind of organization, a kind of operation that's designed to, I don't know, are they trying to mitigate the disaster of the current population pyramid crash across Western civilization, try to take advantage of that crisis? I think that's probably a more accurate characterization of it. But I can assure you that RNA cannot pandemic. I can assure you that intramuscular injection is not a useful methodology for medicine. I can assure you that transfection was always what it was called, and that's why they avoided using the word for 5 years, and why I was fired for using the word from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and also I think later basically from Children's Health Defense. The population pyramid is a problem that needed managing, a problem that still needs managing, and a sort of biological fact that always was part of any military model, any long-term governance model, any long-term projection from a McKinsey Institute or from Shell Corporation would have included talking about the population pyramids and what those predict about the future of those countries. I think one of the best ways to see through this is to realize that Brian Hooker of CHD in 2013 did not use the word autism. He didn't like the word autism. His son was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged, and he would not use the word autism.
Neurologically damaged, a condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged, a condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged.
But you can tell if someone's lying. You know, you can sort of feel it.
And that's why also we have Suzanne Humphreys in front of us now and on Joe Rogan, and not Brandy Vaughn, for example. And Suzanne Humphreys now playing the role of pseudo-skeptic. It is awful because she, like many others, has not made any logical progress in her understanding or in her messaging, and is still stuck in the same gray areas about whether vaccines are okay in some instances or in some concentrations or in some cases. And it is absolutely remarkable.
The one thing I am confident of from everything I've read is that this RNA exists. You can capture it, you can sequence it, you can move it to other cells and recapitulate disease.
The reason why he said that on that podcast,
but you can tell if someone's lying,
is because of me. It directly addresses the RNA cannot pandemic statement, and it addresses it in a very mealy-mouthed, cowardly way, in the same mealy-mouthed, cowardly way that this woman has been making money and living a pretty good life in America ever since she decided to be part of this show. And before that, she was in the UK doing the same shtick for 6 million votes on 90 billboards in her bra. Hello, boys. Brandy Vaughn is dead.
it doesn't matter much at all what you believe about vaccines until we invent really important ones, until we have a pandemic that's killing everyone, and it's measles plus, okay, I can tolerate what you think about measles because, not that many people die from it. It's just a big hassle in the end. But no, when we have this new pandemic that is, got 75% mortality, and there'll be no pretense of being polite in the face of these beliefs. It'll be a moral emergency because it has to be.
Oops. I am very excited about this show today. It's been really hard to keep up with Mark Kulak. Mark Housatonic ITS has been doing some serious work and some serious archiving, and of course now that we are digging in the right place with some idea of what we're looking for, it starts to become really easy to find the fossils and the seashells and the little gold trinklets. And now Mark is starting to pull out great big treasure chests full of gold nuggets and crystal skulls. It's pretty nuts. I don't know what to say other than I'm very, very happy that I asked Mark, who the hell is that guy in that photo with Piper? This is Gigaohm Biological. See you in a sec.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it? Game time! Boom!
Yes, it is definitely game time, ladies and gentlemen, game time. It is mail time. It is wonderful to be here. I know you're in the middle of your daily routine. Thank you. If I'm starting to become a part of it, I'm really happy. It is a long road we're on right now, but on your daily routine, it is going to be very tempting to take a break and go on social media and let that apparatus put thoughts in your head. Don't do it. Don't do it. The only non-compliance that matters is getting off of social media. I will spend some time there and bring what I learned to you. I can assure you that autism spectrum disorder is a myth used to make sure that intramuscular injection is never questioned as a methodology, virology is never questioned as a science, and public health is never questioned as a reason. Pandemics and gain of function are also myths to do the same thing, and they went all in on this pandemic gain of function Scooby-Doo operation because this is their last chance. This is their last chance because the population pyramids tell you why. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't understand the trap you're in, you won't understand why the cheese is free and you'll be dead. Or maybe a better way to say it is your grandchildren will be enslaved. Don't forget, you need to learn the biology in order to get out. Otherwise, they're just going to show you these really fancy computer cartoons and tell you they learned everything about folding proteins, or that it's so cheap to sequence stuff now. It's like a joke, and you can make gain-of-function viruses in your garage with eBay equipment. I am very, very happy to be here today. I feel energized. I feel excited. I'm a little taken aback by the number of landmarks that are lining up now. This whole Indian angle with the former ambassador from the Obama administration and Piper. It really is an American operation, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really convinced that they murdered people in America and then told the rest of the world that it was the start of a pandemic. And so if you've been here for a while, you've been hearing this for way too long, and you're here at the top of the wave. If you're here for the first time, you might be a skilled TV watcher or a what? How would we call you? A skilled social media user. And so you might not be aware of the strategy of staying focused on the biology. Don't take the bait on social media and mainstream media. They're just one big malevolent chorus at this point. And love your neighbor. And that means more and more and more. You don't love your neighbor on social media. There are no neighbors on social media. That's not at all what I'm talking about. The voice that you hear is that of Jonathan J. Cooey. I'm chief biologist at Gigaohm Biological, coming to you live out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the back of my garage. You can find my academic work on the National Library of Medicine's website, PubMed, under the last name Cooey, first name J.J. You can also find some of my work on a Substack or two. They're usually lying or obfuscating things. I'm not on JC on a Bike right now. If you want to see where this all started for me when I was captured and first sort of met all these people, you can go to YouTube on JC on a Bike, but I'm not streaming there right now because for some reason, I guess I don't have sufficient channel history. I also helped Robert F. Kennedy Jr. write his Wuhan cover-up book. I also worked as Children's Health Defense staff scientist under Brian Hooker for about half a year in 2023 to 2024. And I've also been good friends off and on with Jay Bhattacharya. Sometimes he defers to me as a biologist. Other times he's a very big expert on everything. And it's just the time frame of this whole thing leads me to believe that Jay Bhattacharya was never my friend, not even in those pictures. But, you know, I can only just tell the truth. The way this thing works is that there are a select few people that have decided to give me $10 every month by going to Gigaohm Biological and subscribing. They don't get a lot for that. You don't get a lot for that right now. I have intention to give you more, but right now, this work and keeping up with this stuff and keeping my family out of trouble is about all I can do. But I'm very thankful for a few larger donors who make up the difference now. And we do get by. We've gotten by for 5 years. But I could and would show you all of the paperwork of Gigaohm Biological to let you know that, for example, our family was below the American poverty line last year. That doesn't mean much if I have an LLC. You know that there are ways to move stuff around in the background and make ends meet. But I assure you, we don't have a big savings account. We are renting our house in Pittsburgh for a ridiculous amount of money from an LLC that owns lots of other houses. I think you know what I'm talking about. And so if you want to go to Gigaohm Biological and find a way to chip in, that would be great. We would be very grateful. We are still trying to find the lawyer and the accountant to help us start a nonprofit, Gigaohm Biological nonprofit. This is the guy that I'm talking about, Husatonic, Mark Husatonic at HusatonicICS.com. Please go there. He has a research link there that you can go and read about a lot of these people. Look at the archive that he's put together. It's really quite a magnificent piece of work. Whoops. I think there was one more there. No? Oh, no. Okay. Mark and I and Joe, maybe a few other people are part of what I like to call an independent bright web. It's kind of the opposite of the intellectual dark web, which was actually basically a paramilitary internet organization made up of rich guys and their friends. I was corrected the other day by a good friend of mine not to call this a military organization because it automatically makes people kind of jump to the thought of the U.S. military. But instead, maybe paramilitary is a better word, and I have to take that criticism. I think I agree with that. The reason why I don't like that, of course, I don't like the idea of using military as the word to describe these people either, is because I have also become convinced that it's not an exclusively U.S. operation. It feels very, very global. There's a big Indian presence. There's a big UK presence. There's a big South African presence. There's actually the UK presence could be kind of diluted as a UK, Australia, New Zealand kind of bullshit, all mixed in there. And Canada is also very nasty. There are a lot of Canadians that, quite frankly, I think might be working for one of many intelligence agencies, either in Canada or abroad, including some American intelligence agencies. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if we're never going to really be able to adequately characterize this in terms that all of us collectively understand. You know, like it's a British thing, or it's the City of London, or it's Freemasons. It's probably none of those things. It's probably people in or associated with a lot of those things, but it is a group of performers on the internet that is paid by these people, and the organization of them and the tactics that they use are of a military level. And so as precisely as I can, I want you to see that they could communicate limitedly or extensively. They could exchange scripts or not. They could have been given a script and then allowed to go, and then they're all kind of chaotically, responding to one another without clear. There's all different ways where it could be done. And I am definitely not of a mind where the U.S. military is somehow screwing over the whole world with this. That's not what's happening. If the U.S. military is involved, it is involved in the same way that likely the German military, the Dutch military, the British military, MI6, whatever things you want to list are probably involved. Ultimately, I think you need to explain why Kevin McKernan of the Human Genome Project is involved. It ain't because he's a cannabis activist. I think ultimately you got to ask yourself why the guy who was charged with setting up the Winber Institute is involved, especially since, it's really remarkable. I mean, you have to ask yourself why Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein and the intellectual dark web are involved, because they are involved. They are not a loosely organized group of dudes that wanted to start podcasts and fight against the heterodoxy. That's bullshit. That's just absolute bullshit. These people were inserted. That's the reason why Brett Weinstein, before the pandemic, was allowed to go in front of the Senate and complain about what happened to him at Evergreen University, so that as many people as possible that needed Brett would see Brett. It's not that dissimilar from what is said in that silly book. I don't even remember what it's called anymore. Morals and Dogma, where they say, if we need heroes, we will provide them. The people that understand one thing: Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying and their scripted bullshit are useful on both sides of the coin. They are useful if you find Brett Weinstein compelling and soothing, and you find Heather soothing and insightful, or if you find them annoying and conspiratorial and egoistic and ridiculous. They're useful on both sides of that coin. And the beautiful thing about social media is that neither Brett nor Heather needs to see the way that they are used in the negative way. They can just be aware of and even just shown the way that they are given accolades and supported, and their stance is confirmed. They can use social media against the exact people who think they are part of social media. And so this is a depth of understanding that I think very few people have ever gotten to, in the terms of even considering the idea that Brett Weinstein could also be fooled by X and his interaction with it, even as he is told behind the scenes that X will be gamed for him, that locals will be gamed for him, that YouTube will be gamed for. He could be told all of that, and then they could do something else and tell him that he's seeing something else, and never be aware of how many people Brett Weinstein, people think he's an idiot. And I think it's likely that that's occurring. They can also have friends of their friends fund people like Tommy, and then have Tommy be on Rumble every day, all the time, and have these people go on Tommy's podcast and talk to him. Is it really that the former research and development director of the Human Genome Project and multi-millionaire entrepreneur and his sidekick, Jessica Rose, with 5 post-secondary degrees, Canadian, Israeli. They're really going on the Tommy podcast to discuss the DNA contamination. They really think that that's pushing the ball forward because the people that watch him play Call of Duty are interested in the truth, and if they just heard it, they would get off their Call of Duty ass and change things? Or are they performers? Are they doing a job here? And he's just an unwitting, probably addict clown. It's very bad where we are in America, ladies and gentlemen. There's no explanation for this other than we have been fooled. Nobody in America knows who Kevin McKernan is except us. And those people who needed to see Kevin McKernan. Nobody in America knows who Robert Malone is except those people who kind of might have needed to see him. They clicked the right boxes. They pushed the right algorithmic buttons so that the algorithm said, hey, this was a person who's asking too many questions. Give him Robert Malone. Give him Del Bigtree. Send him to that old Andrew Wakefield video. And that is exactly how we got here, where we thought that getting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into HHS secretary by electing Donald Trump was going to be somehow 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional chess that would be checkmate. And instead, what we have is a malevolent show being run by, on the front, by Steve Bannon and Brett Weinstein and Eric Weinstein and a bunch of other clowns on the internet. I mean, a bunch of other clowns that are all associated with one another ever since really 2008 and that Wall Street nonsense with Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski. It's all one continuous buildup of media personalities on the internet that are all bullshit, all either unwitting or people that are witting to go along with it once they were told what they were going to be doing. You're part of the ruling elite. You can't tell everybody everything anymore, like Tucker Carlson has done for the last 20 years. This is all one malevolent show now on a very sophisticated biological script, and we know that for sure now. I started to see it and started to articulate it about a year ago, but Mary Holland and Paul Offit and their endless dance around each other for the last 15 years is the best evidence that this has been a bullshit show all along. Absolutely the best evidence. And now, if you want more evidence, what you need to do is go to the internet and look at the evidence that this was always an intelligence operation. This was always an elaborate performance on the internet, again, provided to anybody who needed it. Put in the right keywords, do the right searches, follow the right people on X, and inevitably you ran into this. And for those that found it appealing, it was extremely misleading. And it's not that you got your champions where they needed to go. They got their saboteurs where they always wanted them. The ruling class has gotten their saboteurs exactly where they wanted them, in the places that they wanted. And you thought it was that they wanted to avoid Robert F. Kennedy Jr. getting HHS secretary. They gave him a real hard confirmation hearing. Boy, those were some hard-hitting questions. And I was pretty disappointed that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said he wasn't anti-vax. Meanwhile, Marty Makary is at the head of FDA, the organization they wanted to neutralize from the very beginning, that this foreigner says that, is probably America would be better off without. And this foreigner agrees that, yeah, it's probably better off without. But now you're at the head of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Oh.
Stop lying!
It's just scripted bullshit, right? So is this.
Significant shift this week. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., joined by FDA Commissioner Dr.
It's hard to
Martin
keep up.
McCary and NIH Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, announced that COVID-19 vaccines will no longer be recommended for healthy children and pregnant individuals. That sparked concerns from...
What I'm trying to suggest to you is that this UK-American dual citizen named Marty McCary is part of a Trojan horse that we were all focused on. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. swinging from chains and doing push-ups without a shirt on, that we didn't see right in front of us what was happening with the complete undermining takeover of the FDA, which will again assure that the clock on the illusion of pandemics and PCR as diagnostics and sequencing as phylogeny and all of this stuff is going to go unevaluated. And we're going to keep looking forward. The FDA is supposed to evaluate what's on a label and make sure that what's on the label is in the box. And the FDA has never done that for a PCR test ever. Please understand that. The FDA is supposed to evaluate what's on the box, on the bottle, and make sure that what's on the label is actually what's in the bottle or on the box. And they have never done that for PCR testing. Of course, they would never do it for sequencing either, because sequencing isn't a medical diagnostic anymore. It's just a measurement, a scientific thing. So you see where we are. We have an unevaluated diagnostic being used around the world in every hospital and in many doctors' offices, providing an endless remnant stream of genetic material and no useful diagnostic information at all, except for the illusion that there are many things in the background moving around asymptomatically. Now, I agree, there are many things in the background, but they're not moving from person to person, killing your cells on the way to the next person all the time, like the virology of their mythology says. And this guy is a surgeon, a UK citizen, American citizen, a surgeon who decided to get a master's in public health.
Stop lying!
I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. And he's the head of the FDA now on PBS NewsHour last week. Have fun.
Some public health officials and medical professionals. But Commissioner McCary has defended the new guidelines, and he joins us now to discuss that and other major health news. Commissioner, welcome to the News Hour.
Good to be with you, Amna.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with that vaccine announcement. As you've heard, some people say this was an end run around CDC that doesn't currently have a permanent director. There's an advisory council on vaccinations that usually weighs in on these decisions. They are scheduled to meet in late June. Why not wait for them to meet before making any kind of announcement?
So most of America has said no to the COVID booster last year. About 85% of healthcare workers refused the COVID booster last year, and very few children are getting the COVID booster. For 88% of children, their parents said no to the COVID booster. So we can't have this huge disconnect. And the reality is...
What do you hear, my friends? As a biology coach, I would like to point out or try to coach you to what you hear. So I'm going to go back a second, and I'm going to try and make you listen to it again.
People want to either see more data or...
June. Why not wait for them to meet before making any kind of announcement?
So most of America has said no to the COVID booster last year. About 85% of healthcare workers refused the COVID booster last year, and very few children are getting the COVID booster. For 88% of children, their parents said no to the COVID booster. So we can't have this huge disconnect. And the reality is people want to either see more data or they have some concerns. And so we need to provide that data for the public to make the case.
So what I hear him saying there is that Americans are making a choice, and the choice is no. Healthcare workers made the choice. They refused the booster. And so the language chosen there is very important, because refusing the booster also seems to suggest that they were offered it or encouraged to take it, suggested they should have it. You fill in the blank, right? That's the neurolinguistic programming going on here. And I think that's why this is a Trojan horse. Why would we have this UK American guy on the PBS NewsHour instead of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They had him on when he was running for president, but now when he's head of Health and Human Services, this FDA guy is on Face the Nation and on PBS NewsHour and on all these news programs, on Megyn Kelly. And he's doing his own FDA podcast with Vinay Prasad and some other Indian girl who's the associate director of something.
Right now, when we came into office, there was this absolute universal recommendation at the CDC. And so the secretary consulted with a number of physicians and decided that he wanted to turn that decision back to a physician and the patient. And we would be more in line with Europe, because in the UK, for example, they only recommend the COVID booster if you're 75 years of age and high risk. Or in France, it's 80 years of age and high risk. So we're really getting closer to the European model. And then the idea that you need a COVID booster every year in perpetuity, that is, a young baby born today needs 80 shots in her average lifetime, that was a theory that's not.
That was a theory? Nobody had that theory. Nobody had an infinite booster theory except for maybe Peter Hotez, and you can find videos where it seems like he had that theory. Nobody's arguing that, and nobody would be willing to accept that. This is a ridiculous argument that now you're going to get data on that, or what? Or you're not going to be recommending multiple boosters because we don't have data on multiple boosters. What an interesting jackass this is.
Not supported with any randomized controlled trial data.
We know the uptake has been low, as you mentioned, but was there science and data behind this, or was this just a decision to end the recommendation?
Well, that's exactly the problem, is that we don't have the data to support that repeat vaccination booster strategy every year in perpetuity. If you get a hepatitis A vaccine, it's one shot.
We don't have the data to support endless coronavirus vaccines. What a stupid nonsense argument. What a dumb question to argue about. What a dumb question to discuss. What a perfectly malevolent hamster wheel this guy is a part of. We are trapped in America. We need help. We need to get out of this. You don't have to watch PBS NewsHour. You just need to understand that this is where it is. This is where the narrative is. This is where it sits for at least half of America.
If you get a hepatitis B or MMR, it's 2, depending on the age group. And so the idea that you need 80 shots in your lifetime in the average lifespan of a woman for the COVID booster is a theory that's unsubstantiated. Some have concerns. There's still people who claim.
That's a quite different argument than what some people at CHD and ICANN were saying was extraordinary, that there was like 72 shots before 18. Now we have a whole nother argument set up here with a whole nother set of questions and justifications. It is a hamster wheel of liars. When Brian didn't use the word autism in 2013 because he didn't like the word autism, his son was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically injured. And so you don't need to call that autism. There could be an autism spectrum that is genetically caused, and it's a bunch of different kinds of goofy people. That's fine with me, with some with talents and some with handicaps. That's fine with me. You want to do that. But we are talking about a very specific thing when we talk about Paulie Tommy's son, and we talk about Brian Hooker's son, and we talk about all of these other people who, after injections, had a rather fast, if not abrupt, change in the behavior and stability of their children. We are in a very malevolent trap, ladies and gentlemen. I have no other way to say it. And I know because I had kids in Norway. I know because I tried to raise some kids in the Netherlands for a little while. I know how it is in other societies that are very similar to ours, and I can tell you that America is in trouble right now. And we need to pull our heads out. We need to understand that mainstream media and social media are one malevolent chorus that has somehow been weaponized to control, demolish America. That's why they're talking like, oh, it doesn't matter if we're $25 trillion or debt or What difference does that make? No, we are really at a precipice. And these people knew it. A precipice of economics, a precipice of banking, a precipice of population pyramid change and instability. And I can't see it any other way than these people with this multi-generational view of a ruling elite have always planned to use this as a transition to essentially make nation states irrelevant. A lot of the way nation states are kind of irrelevant in the EU right now. And I believe that's coming for North America. I believe that the collapse of the dollar will probably be replaced by another currency that may or may not be digital. But for sure, this is a plan. It is a script. And that explains the certainty of people like him. And not the certainty he displays now. I'm talking about the certainty that he displayed in 2020, in 2021, and in 2022. Because that certainty, this certainty that you see here, this confidence and swagger is born of the 5 years of being repeatedly told that you are helping this operation. You are a part of this operation. You are hitting all the marks. We are going to put you in the place that we promised. This is a Trojan horse. America has been infiltrated.
Vaccine injury. I've heard of people who have died from the vaccine. It's rare, but these are questions that the public has. And so at the FDA, we've done our job to put out guidance in the New England Journal of Medicine last week. And that guidance basically says for young, healthy individuals, we'd like to see, this is a good time to check in with the...
Now, remember, they put out a New England Journal of Medicine, a British Medical Journal article, him and Vinay, and they were very excited about their evidence-based approach to COVID vaccines. And, you know, it's going to find, it is so gross. It is so gross. Vinay Prasad is probably the fakest person on earth.
Clinical trial to find whether or not we should be pushing this. Because the worst thing you can do in public health is to put out an absolute universal recommendation with such urgency when the data really doesn't support it. And the reality is the data is mixed.
I just want to say, too, that the vaccine was proven to be overwhelmingly safe and effective.
4 and 5 years ago.
4 and 5 years ago, it was proven to be safe and effective. She just said it was proven to be safe and effective, just so you know. And he says 4 and 5 years ago. Does that sound like questioning the narrative?
Yes,
sure, when it was implemented in the rush to the pandemic
the first
response.
Dose, yes.
In the rush to the pandemic, the first dose, he says. COVID shot bad, don't talk about 2020. Well, we rushed it, she says. In the rush.
There is, I should mention, a new COVID variant that's been gaining momentum overseas, has now landed in the States. Are you anticipating a summer uptick? And if people choose to get the booster, if they...
You see, there's a COVID variant that's now landed in America. So the ongoing spread evolution of this thing is, as he said on the other program we watched yesterday, it's become endemic. Now it's the 5th human coronavirus that is just endemic in the background.
They want to get it now. What does that mean? They have to pay for it out of pocket?
Well, that's up to every individual insurance company. Again, vast majority of Americans have said no to the COVID booster. For those who want to get it, they will be able to get it. There's still going to be vaccines available.
But if it's not recommended, it's likely not going to be covered by insurance,
That's
correct?
up to insurance companies. I mean, I would love some cancer therapies to be covered by certain insurance companies, and they've chosen not to. So we're going to turn this decision back to patients and their doctors. We're going to get more in line with where the public is. The sort of absolutism of you must get your COVID shot every year, even if you're young, healthy, a 12-year-old girl, that disconnect, it's not healthy to be that disconnected from the public. And the reality is we'd like to see a clinical trial supporting that repeat booster strategy.
I want to ask you
Wow.
about
Why
some
do we need?
reporting just today
Wow.
from the news organization Notice about that landmark MAHA report you put out recently, the
Yes.
Make America Healthy Again report. They found that it cited a number of sources that don't appear to exist at all, at least one scientist's name included on a paper she says she never wrote. When we checked on the report later today, it looked like it had been updated. Some of those false sources and names were removed. But what do you want people to know about how that bad information got in there in the first place?
Well, there's over
How that bad information got in there in the first place. We got some author names mixed up on papers in a article with 250 citations because we're just really, it's a whole team of people. I didn't look at everything.
500 references and citations in that report. It's an incredible report. Look, I've written medical journal studies in the peer review literature and some of
It's an incredible report. I have wow.
the citations may not be perfect in the way that they're described there, but
do you include citations that don't exist for sources that don't exist?
I
in
haven't
yours?
double checked those citations, but I can tell you that the content of that MAHA Commission report is amazing. It's
It's amazing. It's game-changing.
changing because now we're talking about microplastics and pesticides and seed oils and the fact that 70% of the food consumed by kids is ultra processed. I don't think our obesity, diabetes epidemic in children is a willpower problem. I don't think it's their fault. I think this is something we are doing to kids. And this report changes the entire discussion in health because we can talk about Medicare payment and states and, site neutral payments, which is a reform that Mehmet Oz has put forth. But the ultimate driver of our healthcare costs in America, of our healthcare crisis and the affordability crisis and the health disparities that result, is the worsening health of the population. And we have not been talking about the health of the population. It has been a 50-year failure of American healthcare. American medicine's amazing at high sophisticated operations and chemo and proton beam therapy. But when it comes to the health of the population, it has been a 50-year failure, and no one has talked about root causes until this MAHA Commission report. It's unbelievable.
And I know it is a priority for you on this message, but
Huge.
to get back to the report, if you
Huge.
want people to trust what's in it, and there were false sources and scientists who didn't work on these papers, are you worried people won't trust it?
Every one of those citations that I read and every line of that report
She's
was
hammering
solid.
that.
Now,
Except for the ones these reporter found.
I
Except
took
for the
a hard
ones-
look at that report and I thought this is an amazing game-changing discussion that it, for the first time in history, is talking about.
See how on message he is? He is well sharpened. Like this is one of their knives in their drawer. It ain't Bobby Kennedy. His 12 scripted things he says there, he's running out of that stuff now. This guy is a player and part of the real Trojan horse.
About the fact that 40% of American kids have a chronic disease. What that means for the future of American healthcare is very concerning, and we can't keep blaming kids for this problem. At the FDA, we're doing.
See, they're concerned about the future of American healthcare, but the future of American healthcare had nothing to do with COVID. Nothing at all.
Doing our part of that report, we have taken action to remove all 9 petroleum-based food dyes from the food supply so that kids don't have these petroleum-based chemicals in their system. We're doing an inventory of all chemicals, including the 1,000+ chemicals banned in Europe that appear in the U.S. food supply. Why? And so we're asking big questions on root causes that we've never asked before. We've got to talk about school lunches, not just chemotherapy.
Yeah.
We got to talk about activity.
The agreement between Peter McCullough and James Lyons-Weiler that you should see as you discuss it in the chat is that Peter McCullough produced a video about a month ago saying that he didn't think that autism was caused by aluminum or mercury because aluminum and mercury have very specific neurological effects that you don't always see in autistic kids. It's a much wider spectrum of effects. And so he doubts it's that. And so for James Lyons-Weiler to say, well, it might be aluminum, it might be mercury, it might be the genetic ability to detox aluminum or detox mercury, and maybe you're not built with that, or your detox proteins are shittier than mine. It number one, first and foremost, accepts the existence of a phenomenon for which there is a single or a few causes that are still unknown, but as soon as we find them, we'll be able to fix it. And on the flip side of that coin is well, there's so many different causes, we're never going to nail it down to one. So there's no reason to nail it down to one, like intramuscular injection. It could be any number of things, including that. And so it's not that dissimilar to how they trapped us in the lab leak or natural virus gets you to accept that there are viruses that are circulating all by themselves and going from a mud puddle to endemicity. This same kind of hamster wheel is occurring here where you're thinking about all the different causes for the chronic diseases. And are the chronic diseases the same as autism? And is allergies the same as autism? Is it all one thing? And it doesn't matter because there are so many things. It could be all the exhaust I inhale every day, or all the food that I eat, or it's all the sunscreen I put on. And it's as many different answers as possible at this point. Makes his job as easy as possible because, there's no wrong answer then. And he never has to give you an answer then. And this guy is exactly the script they needed. The one, not the one that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been learning for the last 10 years, the one that Mary Holland has been keeping him on for the last 10 years. They need this script.
And chemicals and the light exposure in children's circadian rhythms, all of it's in the report. We can't just keep talking about having every kid.
Just make sure you know that I grew up in a school with fluorescent lights, and I'm fine. I don't think fluorescent lights in the school are killing anybody. LED lights could be much worse because they flicker when they have a pulse mediated, like when their brightness is created by flashing. That sucks. I agree with that for sure.
Hit on Ozempic. We're not on a good path, and this agenda, I think, is laid out beautifully in the
Commissioner, I want to note you're not sharing how those false sources got in there, but you're asking people to trust the information in there regardless. We can talk about that more another time. I do want to ask you, though, about the last time we talked. I asked you about the medication abortion, mifepristone. You said you had no plans to pull access for that. You were waiting to see more data coming in to review it, to see if you make a decision or not.
Why would they review this? What is this discussion about? This discussion accepts the idea that it's okay if you're pregnant to get rid of a baby. Just do it. It's fine. Why would we prevent it? Why would we discourage people from doing it? It's your choice. We don't need babies. It's a real dark thing because they're not going to even, it's really dark.
We last spoke. Have you seen any additional information that tells you you have to make a decision one way or the other?
I still have the same view I had when we had that discussion, and that is I've got no preconceived plans to take action on that drug. We are constantly looking at new data.
You know the reason why they wouldn't want this drug? Because they lose that remnant. Because this allows women to abort a fetus at home and flush it down the toilet. Holy shit. That is absolutely terrible for their current model and needs. That is terrible. This drug is terrible. It would be much better if you went somewhere where we could vacuum it into a sample bag and sell it.
As it comes in, and I think we should. I mean, let's say there's a drug-drug interaction that pops up in big data analyses. That's something that we need to look at and pay attention to.
Maybe it'll be a drug interaction that we can bring it off the market from. Perfect. Keep that abortion industry running smooth.
The data guy, though?
I'm a science guy.
Will you hold up the dozens of studies over decades on the medication of abortion, mifepristone, over new information that comes in now?
We have to look at all data. You can't say there's...
See that? That's crazy, right? They're going to make us fight for mifepristone. Like, really? It's gross. This is just gross.
There's a sacred cow thing that makes us be blind to certain data, and that's for the same reason we are at the FDA are saying in the New England Journal of Medicine that we want to see a clinical trial to support the infinite booster strategy.
So not an American journal, but a British journal is trying to tell Americans and their FDA how to do stuff. You see what's happening here? Do you see it? It's subtle, but it's there. Because India is also the British crown. Canada is the British crown. Australia is the British crown. New Zealand's the British crown. Jill Glasspool Malone is the British Crown. This guy is the British Crown. I don't know.
Strategy for young, healthy people.
FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty McCary, thank you for your time.
Thanks,
Appreciate you
Amna.
being here.
I definitely think it's scripted bullshit, but interestingly enough, they do tell you the truth here. The groundwork for the FDA was created by a 1906 act, and the amendment that was put forth by Kefauver and others in the 60s modernized it right before Kefauver was killed. Just let you see that there. They do show that. Interesting little history. Of course, this was all scripted bullshit. You got to imagine a team of performers that were put out there with a script, and they didn't have to have the whole script. They could have just been told to stick to the VAERS reports or stick to myocarditis from the spike protein and then pivot to amyloidosis from the spike protein. Hell, just focus on the spike protein for 5 years seems to be what a lot of people were told to do. And while that happened, people were murdered in America. And then those numbers were thrown out to the rest of the world as evidence of the beginning of something very, very terrible. And at the same time, populations in the West that were even more out of balance in their population pyramids were much more rigorously managed. I think one of the nastiest examples of this is Scotland, where a tremendous number of old people were killed. A tremendous number of old white people were killed. And the evidence of that is now gone, really. And if you look at this report from the McKinsey Global Institute, you might not even see how top-heavy a lot of these pyramids were around 2018. And how predictable it would be that this all-cause mortality rise was going to be a pretty big burden on hospitals and on budgets. Never mind the coming loss of children in schools and students in universities. A huge sector of the economy is about to change very drastically simply because of the loss of demographic. And they've seen this coming for a while, and now they're proposing, some solutions to this demographic reality. But this demographic reality was actually mitigated quite a lot by sculpting it using murder and lies. This is not an insignificant number of people that they killed. They saved a lot of money here. And they are still saving money because COVID still exists and because people can be killed in the hospital because of that mythology. There are no financial incentives in place anymore to kill people as far as I know, but there used to be. There aren't as many PCR tests for that particular target as there used to be, but there still are PCR tests. Some PCR tests purport to test for like 17 different things at once. And none of those will be evaluated by an FDA with a UK citizen and an Indian citizen and an Indian citizen and Indians in the head of them that are all looking forward to, revolutionizing the approval of cancer drugs, which is what Vinay and this guy have said repeatedly. This team of performers with elaborate costumes and fancy Rumble scripts and fancy Rumble studios provided to them in their garden are just an elaborate team of performers. And that script, largely provided by the Human Genome Project Research and Development Director Kevin McKernan and Robert Malone of DITRA and other organizations. Meryl Nass has probably been on Robert Malone's biological script for some time, maybe ever since her anthrax hearing where they first overlapped. You got to get off social media because that's where all these people have power. That's where they can enact their stunts. They can perform their shtick. They can pretend that there's some agreement between Malone and McKernan and some argument between Crawford and Rose, and so you're watching real time the truth being sorted out, and it's not true.
Lying.
It's not true. Just like Brian Hooker saying, it is, we're really in big trouble. We really are. I guess that is going to stop. Yeah. We are really in big trouble. And so we just got to keep working.
But you can tell if someone's lying, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
Really,
But you can tell if someone's
scripted,
lying.
scripted. It should be absolutely infuriating when you just see this one slide and realize that for 20 years she's made no progress. 20 years she's made no progress. She spent more time and made more progress getting her daughter a modeling contract than she has in getting the word out about the dangers in the vaccine schedule. The myth of vaccines is something that she'll never say because she is part of this grift, a very integral part of this international grift that originated apparently in the UK with a guy by the name of Andrew Wakefield, who they used to kind of help hijack this otherwise just, innocent environmentalist who was just trying to save the water from burning. And I think that's bullshit. I think Tony Lyons and Steve Bannon and others whispered in his ear and said, we can make you president. And first we'll make you vice president. Here's a friend of ours who's writing a biography. We're going to put a little epilogue in the back of that book, and we're going to seed the narrative right away in 2008 that you're going to run for president independently, and then you're going to join one of the candidates and win. And then that's where we are right now, almost exactly where we are right now. But we needed a biological narrative because, of course, we're talking about a anticipated rise in all-cause mortality and a transition from national sovereignty to some kind of international, globalist, I don't know what it is, technocracy. And these guys would love to be a part of it. I have no doubt in my mind that Kevin McKernan and Robert Malone would love to be a part of any global technocracy. That's the reason why so early on in 2020 he was collaborating with such a diverse crowd as Mike Eden and Claire Craig and Thomas Binder and all these other people on the Corman Jorston report, that it's too remarkable for words other than to say it is an elaborate intelligence operation. This is some kind of privately organized or multinationally organized cabal of people that are trying to make social media relevant for governance. And the way they're making it relevant for governance is their performances on social media, what they say on social media, the scripts that they provide to people on social media, and their coordination of them. That's what's happening here. You see a bunch of actors with a provided script. Maybe the script at this point is being generated by an AI that's fed, certain texts by these guys. Maybe the Substacks of Robert Malone and Jessica Rose provide the bare necessities for an AI to give a script to a bunch of jokers. But you can see it if you look clearly at the history that I have always been honest about. And it really can see it when you look at Piper Stover and where she went. Disappeared. Even as soon as like a year ago, you would have the guts every once in a while to say that, I watched your stream, sounds pretty good or something like that. This is an organization of liars of the highest malevolence. That's all I know for sure. I know that a lot of them have lied to me. I've been the focus of a lot of their attention, sometimes in groups at a time, over the course of the last 6 years. Some of the worst characters in this narrative, unfortunately, are Robert Malone, Kevin McKernan, and Brett Weinstein, just for their level of fakery and their level of personal attacks or personal omission, essentially interfering with my family's ability to make a living. And so Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the victim of the ultimate Truman Show because he's had people like Meryl Nass and Mary Holland, absolute traitors to American children, in his whispering for a decade already. He's a hopelessly lost person at this stage. It's unfortunate, but that's the conclusion I have to come to. That's the reason why they're bringing in all these new people on social media that we're supposed to pay attention to, like Jack Cruz or the Callie Means and Casey Means stuff. This is all desperate script reorganization, pulling people off of a bench that should have never existed in the first place to try and keep the last unwitting participants on script, including Mary Talley Bowden, who was just on Joe Rogan. Let's listen to some more. I gotta probably fix this. Hold on 1 second. This is gonna be interesting, I think.
We're live. Hello, Facebook. It's your boy, Dr. Zubin Damania. Welcome to the Z-Dog MD show. Dude, you know who I have in the garage today? Such a Silicon Valley thing, shooting out your garage. Dr. Peter Hotez is a super duper professor at Baylor in Texas, and he is legendary. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but he is legendary as a vaccine researcher, as a studier and fighter of tropical diseases, particularly in the developing world and in the world of people who live in poverty, which is still the vast majority of human beings. He is also a hero of science communication and a hero to people who care about keeping our children safe, and fairly reviled by anti-vax and the anti-vax cult around the world. Dr. Peter Hotez, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. No pressure with that introduction.
You know what? I set
This is 2020.
the bar low,
Yeah.
and then you just traipse right over it. Man.
Right.
I like your style, brother. Look at the outfit, man. Like, here I am in like a Patagonia jacket,
Right.
and you are bringing actual. There's something about the way you project yourself that brings the science into it. Is this thoughtfully done by you, or something that you drifted into?
Well, I can tell my medical students and residents you can either dress for the job you have, or you can dress like Peter Hotez. And so the bow tie adds about 10 to 15 IQ points. So
that's why my dad wears one.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, December 2019. My bad. Thank you.
when you wear that, people think you really know, and now look at me, I'm a dean. So there you go.
So what is your background and title there? Just walk me through it real quick.
So I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and ever since I was a kid, I wanted to study tropical diseases. I was a nerdy kid who had a fascination with microbes after reading Microbe Hunters, and I used to bring maps with me into the bathroom. That was I was obsessed with maps. And so what happens when you get microbes and maps together? You get tropical diseases. So I knew
you're literally like Jack Black's character on Jumanji.
Oh, that one I don't know. But
now you have homework. Go watch Jumanji the remake.
All right, but I went to Yale because they had a lab there that was working on sleeping sickness, and that's what I wanted to do. And then I did an MD and PhD at Rockefeller and Cornell because they were opening up this new science of molecular parasitology. It was the first time people were cloning genes from medically important parasites.
When was this?
This was the whole length of the 80s, 1980, 1987, just at the dawn of the molecular biology revolution. And so I was one of the first.
Funny, that's the same timing as Robert Malone, the dawn of the molecular biology revolution. I wonder if he also thought that maybe there would be a geneticist at every hospital curing childhood diseases with retroviruses.
Clone a gene from hookworms and wanted to make a vaccine even as an MD PhD student. So I'm living out my boyhood fantasies. I'm doing exactly what I've always...
It was his boyhood fantasy to make a vaccine for tropical diseases. He carried maps into the bathroom while he was a kid because he always knew he wanted to be a microbe hunter, and microbe hunters need maps. I get it.
I'm probably one of the most goal-directed people you'll ever meet.
One of the most goal-directed people you will ever meet. Holy shit.
We used to, in medical school, we used to call people like you gunners. I don't know if they still use that, if they use that term at Baylor.
It's a good term. I've never heard it, but the only difference, I think, between then and now is the public engagement advocacy piece. I always knew I'd be an MD PhD laboratory investigator and having a lab working on vaccines for tropical diseases. It's all the other stuff that I never would have anticipated doing, never realized that I had a voice to get people to care about people living in poverty with neglected tropical diseases, building up that whole ecosystem.
Neglected tropical diseases will soon be abbreviated NTDs, just so you know, not to be confused with STDs. NTDs are something tropical diseases. I can't even remember it.
Or defending
Neglected.
vaccines, or getting people to care about the poor in the United States, and working with elected leaders and high-profile people. That is something that I would not have predicted, and is really something.
I think they probably use poor people as test subjects. I don't think they're just poisoning them. I think they're testing on them. I think they test on them.
That's unfolded maybe in the last 2 decades.
In the last 2 decades,
Yeah.
it's interesting to me how advocacy becomes a thing, because there have been people on the show that are big advocates. They're also scientists, but it's a really unusual thing. Now, people like Einstein, were big advocates, say against nuclear war or things like that, and about understanding the nature of our universe so we understand our place in it, and this kind of humanity that met the science. And I think in advocacy, where we've let down the public, is that we put our smartest people back in the lab. We don't let them use language that triggers emotions, because we're not trained to do that as scientists. And then we wonder why celebrities and other people run with this stuff.
Well, what happened was that the way this got started was a very interesting way. I moved from Yale to George Washington University in 2000 to chair the microbiology department. I was a young...
Listen to this story and understand. Please listen to this story and understand, and put it into the context of Mark Kulak's work on 9/11 and the possibility that, how do you explain that the focus before 9/11 was exclusively bioterrorism, and then 9/11 happened? Was it because they decided that a bioterrorist attack for real wasn't doable, so they did a big explosion first and then did some envelopes? I guess you could see it that way. But the point is very clear I want to make, is that the anthrax attacks that occurred in America entangled people like Stephen Hatfill, who was the original suspect of the leak of the anthrax from U.S. Amarid, who was also on stage in Romania in November of 2023 with Robert Malone, Meryl Nass, Jessica Rose, Brett Weinstein, Denny Rancor, Nick Hudson, Ryan Cole. The list goes on. And this guy, sitting at his desk, rose to prominence in this way. Listen carefully.
Department chair, 40 years old, and so here I was in the microbiology department, a few blocks from the White House, and then anthrax hit. There were the anthrax attacks.
Oh, and that's 2001
in Washington, New York, and what happened was the Centers for Disease Control had sort of gone into shutdown mode. They weren't really talking to journalists, and this was not far after 9/11, right? And so the major news outlets were going crazy, wanting to talk to experts. So who do you talk to? The guy who had the microbiology department next to the White House. And so the phone was ringing off the hook. Now, what did I know about anthrax, right? I mean, I knew as much about, I've never had seen a case of anthrax. I knew as much about anthrax as anybody who had infectious disease training, had to study it for a board exam or something like that.
A board exam in infectious disease training.
Stop lying!
That's ridiculous. That's just stupid. That doesn't even make any sense. Come on.
I literally had Mandel's infectious disease book open to the anthrax chapter, and Stan Plotkin's vaccine book open to the anthrax chapter. And I was getting calls from, Donald McNeil, the New York Times.
He had 2 books open to the anthrax chapter. Huh. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to check it right now. So he says that he checked these 2 books were right down here underneath my desk, underneath my drafting table. He said, I'm going to plug in my earphones again. Hold on one second. He said that he looked in Plotkin's vaccines. He had that book open to the anthrax chapter. This is Plotkin's vaccine book, written also by Paul Offit. Look how thick it is. It's pretty complicated subject, vaccines. You need a great big frickin' book. Let's look up the anthrax in Stanley Plotkin's book, The Anthrax Vaccines. Oh, there they are, page 11. 111. It's pretty far, not very far in the book. The anthrax vaccine. Okay, you had it open to that, huh? It's a pretty long chapter here. Passive immunization, active immunization. Wow, crazy. Wow. It's nuts. That's a lot of, oh wow, look at all those references. So he had it open to that. I guess I don't know what he would get out of this. Clinical description, cutaneous inhalation. I guess he would have learned a lot of this gastrointestinal anthrax, treatment and prevention with antibiotics. History of vaccine development. That'll be really interesting to read that. There's some Russian stuff there. Okay, so he had it open to that. I'd give him that. Maybe he got something out of that. I don't think you could get very much out of that. The Infectious Disease by Mendel. That's this one. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong camera. Let's see if I can find the anthrax in here. I don't know if this is an alphabetical thing or what. Section C. No, I don't think that's going to work. We're going to have to look up anthrax in the back, I think. In the index. Anthraxy. Hey, there's a vaccination during pregnancy. That's funny. Anthrax. Boy, I can barely see. I got a new pair of glasses the other day. They're my Whitney Webb readers. I like my Whitney Webb reading glasses. Let's see. Anthrax. Anthrax toxin. Anthrax vaccine. Anthrax 1885 to 1889. Okay. There's a lot of infection. 1880 what? I can't do that very well. 1880 what? Dang it. It's right here. Somewhere there's pneumonia, bacillus, anthrax. Here we go. It's basically the same titles. Look at that. Historical background, epidemiology, microbiology, pathogenesis, clinical manifestations, cutaneous, respiratory, and gastrointestinal, control and prevention. It's not a very long chapter. It's 3 pages long. If you want a pair of Whitney readers, you got to go to Blenders, where that's the glasses that Deion Sanders wears. Sorry that I defaulted to that. My bad. Anyway, they were there. So he had it open to these 2 books. So these are the 2 books that he's talking about. That is Mendel's Infectious Disease. It's actually a 2-volume book, the one that I got. And this one, which is bigger than most Catholic Church Bibles, the Vaccines by Plotkin, which is a great book. I haven't read it all yet because it's really, it's just invigorating. Can't take it all at once. So let's see if we can get this gap back going here and see what we got going.
Times and Steve Sternberg was USA Today and Maggie Fox at Reuters. And, I was practically reading from the chapter, pretending like I wasn't reading. And they all thought I was the smartest thing that ever lived, and wound up cultivating a whole group of journalists, and found that I enjoyed it. I liked the intellectual interaction with, especially science journalists. They're really smart people.
Yeah.
And they ask questions that I never would have asked myself, and they forced you to look up things. And I actually I found it a great learning experience. So it was something I really enjoyed. And then what happened was, at that time, the Millennium Development Goals had been launched by the United Nations, and I was...
What are those?
And my wife is a longtime, co-author of a guy by the name of Jeffrey Sachs, who works for the UN. So, 1 and 1 makes 2, right? I just started working for the UN then. Why not?
Those are the set of shared goals for global poverty reduction. At that time, how to address the plight of people who live in extreme poverty, what were then called the bottom billion, 1 billion people in the world that live below the World Bank poverty figure of what was then $1 a day, and how to lift those people out of poverty. And there was a goal for infectious diseases called to combat AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. And then I realized, everything I had done, studying.
What do you think that is behind him there? Can you see that? What do you think that is? What character? Put that in the chat. I want to know what you think that is. That's a coffee cup, but I don't know what that is. That's a dude. Looks like a dude in jeans with a belt on, and then a white shirt with maybe a funny collar. I don't know what that is. That's weird to me. That's a funny one. I want to know what that is. It's probably a germ hunter.
Parasitic diseases and tropical diseases was now called other diseases. So you saw all of the excitement of Bono, getting up there talking about HIV/AIDS, and
a half scale Fauci.
You had Angelina Jolie, and then at that time you got Angelina, you got
his muscles are too big. That's then, and his torso legs are a little long for that to be a Fauci.
Brad as well. So this was creating all this buzz. And
I miss Brangelina. I really do.
Yeah, me too. And here I was stuck, working on something called other disease. I was like, what the fuck is this?
Also ran?
Fuck up. That's it.
What the fuck is this? In 2019, he's on a podcast with an Indian former doctor, now podcaster, in the garage in California. He says Silicon Valley. I thought he was in Las Vegas, but whatever. He's got lots of places he shoots. Think about this carefully. Why would somebody who's trying to be a UN representative, a global leader in public health, use the word F word, the F word ever? Why? Why would you choose to do that? And now, unfortunately, they're going to do it several times in a row.
I'm not doing other diseases. So we teamed up with two colleagues, David Molyneux at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, Alan Fennick at Imperial College London.
David Molyneux. Oh, it's an interesting name because there's another Molyneux that was on the web doing stupid bullshit. I wonder if they're related.
London. And we went about doing a branding exercise, just calling it neglected tropical diseases, and looking at the opportunity of targeting them with a package of medicines that we could deliver potentially for 40 cents a person per year, because the drug companies at that time were donating a lot of medicines. They still are. So it took away the cost of the medicine. So we wrote these back-to-back papers in PLOS, in the public library. Back then it was PLOS Medicine, plus NTDs wasn't created then. Okay, you write the papers, and then what? Right, as an academic.
They have a whole journal called Plus NTDs for neglected tropical diseases. I mean, it's so awful. It's just so awful.
Academic, why do you write the papers? You write the papers so you can
advance your academic career.
So you can get grants.
Yeah.
And why do you write grants? So you can write more papers, so you can write more grants. And
so even if viruses don't exist or gain of function isn't real, if you can establish a mythology in the literature that it is real, then your career is going to be set and your justification for your work is done. And you can move lots of piles of money around. Governance by mythology, ladies and gentlemen.
We wanted to get this out there, and I was able to bring in back all of those journalists I talked to about the anthrax attacks to get them to care about this. And before I knew it, I was taking a taxi down to the executive office building of the White House. This was the Bush administration at the time, and talking to
Bush one,
Bush two,
Bush two.
George W. Bush, and members of Congress. And I found again that I had a voice, and which is really an important message, is that as a physician or a physician scientist, don't underestimate your power. If you're willing to take the time to step away from the grants and the papers, and now, of course, it's all the other garbage, right? The over-credentialing and the terrible EHR and everything else. If you're willing to take the
terrible EHR, electronic health records, they're so annoying. Gosh, I wish we could fix those. Man, oh man, maybe there's an AI solution that the FDA could push.
time to step away from that, you can move mountains. And we were able to get within a year of those papers, we got $15 million appropriated through Congress. It may not sound like much, but that was enough to treat 30 million people.
Wow.
And now the World Health Organization.
That was enough.
That
was enough to make him dean.
Announced that more than 1 billion people have received this package of medicine.
That's
so
crazy.
So
it's funny because I was looking up Marty McCarty and I couldn't believe what I found. Actually, just going to his Wikipedia, I noticed that Marty, not only is he from Liverpool, England, but if I look at this carefully, what I see is a dude who went through surgical oncology, that's cutting out cancers, and then decided to go into public health and actually worked for the World Health Organization to develop the official World Health Organization surgical checklist. So we have a former World Health employee at the head of the FDA, who's also a UK citizen with allegiances outside of America. Think about that bullshit for a second. Think about that bullshit very carefully for a second, please.
What's really interesting is I was just inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences.
Nerd.
Not for my science. I got it in the public policy sector. And I was never trained in public policy, but again, it points to the fact that as a physician or physician scientist,
awards are given to people they want you to believe in. Like a Nobel Prize for Barack Obama or a Nobel Prize for Carrico and Weissman.
You can be a subject matter expert and you can...
I would go so far as to say that the last real Nobel Prize was awarded to Edward and Maybrit Moser and John O'Keefe for their discoveries in the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex. Prove me wrong.
Do things that nobody else can do.
And so it's an amazing story because I think many people feel pigeonholed if they do the MD PhD route or they do the researcher route. They're like, well, I'm not really, I'm a couple of levels of abstraction away from actually helping people. It's got to go through this and that. But through advocacy, through actually putting yourself out there, which I think this has been the struggle. So recently I've been talking a lot about, because doctors will ask me all the time, like, hey, man, Z, how'd you get out of the game, man? Because I don't see you with a finger in anyone's butt today. Right. And I'm still like clicking away at Epic and I'm still... having to deal with MACRA and MIPS and all these quality measures. And I'm like, no, I did that too. I did that and it made me so mad. I realized I wasn't able to actually prevent a single person from coming in the hospital.
Oh man, you practically had me in tears. I looked at that when you put out that, I think you called it moral injury YouTube video. I was like, oh my God, he's so right. You tapped into something and you tapped into something especially for young physicians. I mean, when I talk to young, medical students, residents, as well as doctoral students for getting their PhD or MD PhD, the commitment to public service and wanting to do good in the world is at an all-time high. I don't know, whatever they're saying about young people, it's bullshit.
It's bullshit.
Right.
These guys are as idealistic as you've ever seen.
They want to do good, but it's my generation of physicians and scientists and academics. We've done everything we can to squash the young generation, and we've not created an ecosystem for them to allow that to flourish. And so,
is this intentional, or is this a product of our own hierarchy and our own conditioning?
I think it's complacency. A lot of it's laziness. We've allowed so many other forces to gain a hold. I mean, the medical profession is over-credentialed. It's too obsessed with board certified this and that, these horrible standardized tests at USMLE. When I was a medical student, I had to take the USMLE, but you had to pass it.
Yeah. It was
I don't
P
even know.
equals MD.
I don't know if I got a score.
Yeah.
So did I study for it? So I remember that I did really badly in renal physiology. in my first 2 years of medical school. So I made sure I studied renal physiology, and I still did the worst. That was still my worst score anyway.
Me too.
But the point is, what did I do? I took a week off or a few days off to look at renal physiology. And that was it. Now, what we see medical students doing is awful. They're spending months studying for this stupid fucking exam when they should be, in the lab, when they should be doing creative.
Stupid fucking exam. How is it possible? There's no way. This is a military operation of some sort put together by some paramilitary, weaponized pile of money putting shitheads out there. This guy, there's no way you're swearing like this and trying to save anybody.
Endeavors when they should be making discoveries, and we're burying them with tests and credentialing and all the other stuff that you talk about, like EHR.
So okay, everything you just said brings to mind an email I just got from a third-year medical student who's about to take some step exam, and it's just like, oh, they just computerized the scoring of it, so now a computer's going to score us, and
we started branding them as NTDs, and now everyone gets it, so I'm afraid to mess with it. So
yeah. It's like when they change it to STI.
Right,
I'm like, no, these are sexually transmitted diseases.
Yeah, let's just keep it as NTDs, and that's like a thing now.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how widespread they are, and getting people to care has been tough. So now with Senator Booker on board and the House and Chris Smith, maybe we'll get some traction. But the vaccine issue, the vaccine advocacy issue, that was something I never intended to do. Again, the history of my advocacy is. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I love being a physician, pediatrician, scientist, working at Texas Children's Hospital in Baylor. Great bosses. I couldn't be happier. But then you see a vacuum, and somebody has to say something. So NTDs, poverty-related diseases among the poor in the U.S. In Texas, after I moved to Texas in 2011 to set up the school and the vaccine center, we saw 60,000 kids in Texas being denied access to vaccinations. And
why?
And those are the ones we know about because we have 325,000 homeschooled kids in Texas. We have no idea how many of those are.
Yeah.
So we probably have over 100,000 kids not getting vaccinated. And it turned out, why weren't they getting vaccinated? Because a political action committee, a PAC, came in to Texas, allied themselves with the far right wing of the Republican Party, the Tea Party, and then, not that I have a problem with the far wing of the Republican Party, because one of the things the anti-vaccine movement does is they shift their language depending on the state.
Depending on the state,
they're,
right.
They're opportunists. So in the case of Texas, they used this language that would appeal to the libertarian streak of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And they started making up these terms like health freedom, medical freedom. It's bullshit, right? Basically, they're denying kids the right to protection against serious or deadly infections.
And so he's right. It is bullshit, but not the way that he is characterizing it as bullshit, because it's not a useful opposition to the biological conundrum that is intramuscular injection as a great way to administer medicine. But instead putting up this ridiculous hamster wheel that Paul Offit and Mary Holland established in 2015 with their clash on Democracy Now!
And they appeal to the left, by the way, through this like mystical sanctity, purity thing.
Around
organic,
toxins,
pure
things
toxins.
like that, right.
So they speak the language of the
I like to
extremes
say
very
it's
well.
the one thing that's going to unite the country. The far left and the far right is the anti-vaccine movement. So
that's not that dissimilar to what I think Steve Bannon saw all along, that they saw and tested all along in the UK when they put Tommy on 90 billboards to shift 6 million votes. It is a way to unite some far left and some right people on some kind of pseudo-conservative basis and get them to vote for somebody or cheer somebody on, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And now an elaborate bait and switch has happened where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is just a mindless, meaningless puppet, just put in place wherever he needs to be so that people clap and cry, and Marty McCarty does all the Sunday shows and seeds all the scripted narratives of the Casey Means and Callie Means and all these other nutritional people who have no concept of how badly they're being used. It's all one malevolent show, scrambling for people to get out. I mean, to take part.
I walked in and said, what the hell's going on here? And then once again.
So we could watch more of that, but I don't really have time. It's a team of performers. I know all of these people. I know all of them are on a script for bullshit. The question is, for what? If you want to understand why, you need to understand what Brian Hooker, a 16-year government employee that was genetically modifying plants to make medicines before his child was inflicted with autism, what he doesn't call autism in 2013, doesn't like that word, because his son was neurologically damaged by an injection or a series of them. And he's pissed. But then somewhere in 2015 or 16, he decided to use the word autism, maybe because Meryl Nass and Mary Holland convinced him to. Mary Holland was on Democracy Now! In 2015, opposite Paul Offit, arguing about MMR, restarting the narrative that was already enacted by Andrew Wakefield and Polly Tommy in the UK at least 5 or 8 years before this. Understand that. It's a hamster wheel because the same parts of the narrative keep coming back in front of you again. That's why Andrew Wakefield keeps coming down and will probably soon be on the Joe Rogan show. 2016 is when ICANN was established on April Fool's Day. And also when Vaxxed 1 was released, the first movie produced by Polly Tommy and Andrew Wakefield, a movie produced by them. That's why they have ranches in Texas. 2018 is when Bobby Kennedy reluctantly changed the World Mercury Project to Children's Health Defense with Mary Holland and Meryl Nass behind him. Not recruiting, of course, Brandy Vaughn, because Brandy Vaughn and Learn the Risk were already aware that these people were liars, that Larry Cook was a liar. And in 2018 is when Larry Cook and StopMandatoryVaccinations.com, or whatever the hell his shitty website is, decided to pull a fake stunt with Paul Offit and Z-Dog, where they actually promoted not Brandy's website, but this Stop Mandatory Vaccinations website of Larry Cook, an associate of these assholes, and probably somebody who facilitated the murder of Brandy Vaughn. 2019, you have to realize that in 2019, we had James Lyons Weiler touring the United States telling everybody that vaccine preventable diseases are circulating asymptomatically in the background, and that's why there's a constant danger for genetically vulnerable or immunocompromised people. You have to understand that in 2019, Brandy Vaughn was still alive, that Tony Bark was still alive, and then they just started dropping off, and by December of 2020, Brandy Vaughn was dead, Tony Bark was dead, and former government employee Brian Hooker is on live streams telling everybody that COVID is asymptomatic, that you can look for antibodies, and that we need to test the vaccines more. And then 5 years later, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the White House, and PCR is a universal diagnostic tool for everything from viruses to measles to some genetic diseases. Sequencing is a high-fidelity measurement of these signals in the wild, including coronavirus, and there's a new variant coming because we're monitoring that sequence all the time. Endemicity is a process and also an end state that you have to accept, even though there's no biological evidence for that process or that end state. It is part of the mythology of RNA being able to do something that it can't. And finally, gain of function has many forms, from serial passage to direct construction, and you have to accept all of these things under their rubric of pandemics and Bad Biology 101 evolution because DNA. Very similar to how you accept that intramuscular injection is like the best invention ever. That you accept pandemics are real and that we can also make them, sometimes in a garage. You are a human, not a person with a select amount of time to contribute to future generations. You are a human experimental subject. And finally, we all descend from the same puddle, so stop pretending you're so special. That's the message of the pandemic, I think, and that's what we have to stop them from teaching our kids, and we have to stop teaching it to our kids ourselves. It's been a long, strange trip. I don't know how to characterize it any other way. A long, strange trip. Thanks for being here, We are going to work very hard on Bad Biology 101, but not today. I'm going to do a little music break, and then we're going to go back to Peter Hotez again. Thanks for being here. The winner is Eric Johnson. Eric Johnson, via Musicom.
Now, Dr. Gallo and Dr. Fauci talked a lot about isolation and purification. Can you tell me what the difference is between the two?
Isolation, what was it?
Isolation and purification.
Of the virus?
Yes.
Well, you isolate a virus by finding the virus which causes a disease. You purify a virus by making a lot of, just by purifying it so you get a pure virus.
Okay.
I don't understand what the issue.
They interchanged the two, and I wasn't sure
I see.
If it was the same thing or if it was two totally different.
No, it depends on how they use it.
Okay. Can you explain the process of HIV isolation?
Well, didn't Dr. Gallo do that? I mean, he actually isolated it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, why should I do all of this? This is all textbook stuff you're asking me.
Good morning. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the show. This is Gigaohm Biological on the back end. This is the second half of the show. It is still the Gigaohm Biological High Resistance Low Noise Information Brief brought to you by those people scrolling on the left there. You can find this work at stream.gigaohm.bio. Also, some more links at gigaohmbiological.com. That's also a way to get informed there by giving that email to my wife so she can let you know that I'm doing a stream. Basically, I'm doing a stream every day, 5 days a week at about 11 o'clock. 10 o'clock is generally my target, but I don't always make it, and then I delay it until 11, and then by the time I've delayed it, I'm late. That's my only explanation for what's going on here, other than the fact that there's a Trojan horse in the American government that is intellectually fueled on mostly by social media theater. And that social media theater, the biological portion of it, is scripted by Kevin McKernan and Robert Malone, with lots and lots of players witting and unwittingly participating. Steve Bannon is in the background, whose name is again spelled N, because I guess I put the wrong slide there. Yeah, let's get those guys back in again. Does that work? No. Jiminy Christmas, come on. Get those guys back in there. And Brett Weinstein, of course, is really interesting to understand as a phenomenon that I think probably wasn't supposed to play as much of a role as he's being allowed to play now, simply because, as I explained earlier, he's useful on both sides. He's useful if you find him annoying and can make fun of him, and he's useful if you find him insightful or soothing. So I think the best example that I have from my personal experience to show you how awful this is number one, Andrew Kaufman, who had a contract with the state of New York to make biometric monitoring devices for the prisons before the pandemic. And Tom Cowan, who had a kind of skeptical book in 2018, a lot. I like a lot of these people, who doesn't seem to have progressed in his messaging very well, other than just saying that these people don't know what they're talking about because I'm such a down home kind of guy that I just like to stand around and talk like an American. He's a real fake. And then you have a Canadian like Christine Massey, who spent an inordinate amount of time trying to contact me via email and convince me that her FOIA requests were more important than my biology or something, and especially while I was working at CHD, which is kind of comical. Remember that Andrew Kaufman was on a stream in 2021 where they showed him some video of Ryan Cole and Robert Malone, and he wouldn't want to disparage anybody in the field, but he disagrees with some of their biology. And so what we have here is a scripted narrative and people performing different parts of it with the express purpose of militarizing social media against you. Militarizing social media against you cannot be done with programming and bots. Militarizing social media cannot be done to you by algorithms and bots. Understand that. The only real militarization of social media is the purposeful placement of fake people on it and their scripting. You can't take a bunch of real people trying to be themselves and say the truth and then take an algorithm and shake it up so that the truth can't be figured out. That's a bullshit, ridiculous idea. And you also can't just, pull a few people off the internet or censor a couple people to demonetize a couple Brett Weinsteins and then keep the truth from getting out. That's not how the internet works. Instead, the internet works by populating your feed with fake people on fake scripts. That's what Kevin McCairn is. That's what Andrew Kaufman is. That's what the Baileys are. That's what Christine Massey is. That's what Tom Cowan is. That's what Mary Holland is. That's what Meryl Nass is. That's what Brian Hooker has chosen to become. What Polly Tommy has always been, what Andrew Wakefield is. These are people who have helped to weaponize the internet against populations of Earth.
It's literally turning into worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario.
Actually, JJ Couey's insistence, and I think he's right, on calling them transfections rather than vaccines.
And of course, this is particularly damning for the Weinsteins because they knew this in a Signal chat in 2021 that also included Chris Martenson of IMA FLCCC board fame. Yeah. Also included Alexandros Marinos, the possible gay lover of Elon Musk. Matt Crawford, who's supposedly a victim of a military rape camp when he was a kid and now permanently traumatized and used to oversee $1 billion in day trading and has made a fortune in retiring because of Bitcoin, I guess. Heather Haying, Jumi Kim, somebody who used to do, I guess, genetic modification of algae to make fuels or something like that. I don't know. That thing that the guy from the Human Genome Project's all fired up about. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? That was in 2021. And then in 2022, they started talking about me on their podcast and teasing me with the possibility that I might get on. But every time Brett mentioned my name, he said, I think I thought of this myself, but I also heard it from Peter McCullough and Jay Couey. They knew it all. And most importantly, they knew that transfection was the right word, but it took him until 2024 to say that on Twitter. And then when he said it, he still kind of said it in a pretty shitty, snarky way. In 2022, what did Heather say?
Transfections rather than vaccines. Actually, JJ Couey's insistence, and I think he's right, on calling them transfections rather than vaccines.
So not Dr. Jonathan Couey of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not Dr. Jonathan Couey, formerly of the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, JJ Couey. I have a PhD like they do, but I'm JJ Couey. Not Jonathan J. Couey, PhD from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who used to work at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, is currently a consultant for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. No. J.J. Couey.
You have now a rough relationship with Joe Rogan. It started off positive.
How are you, sir?
How are you?
Good to see you again.
I'm thrilled to be here.
He was inviting you on as an expert to talk about what's going on in the early days of the pandemic. How did that change?
I criticize him when he puts out vaccine disinformation and ask him not to do that.
If you're like 21 years old and you say to me, should I get vaccinated? I go, no.
I was writing to him. I said, Joe, have me on because what you're doing is dangerous. People are now making decisions based on what they're...
Now, this is Peter Hotez 5 years after, almost 6 years after now. It's 6 years after that 2019 video that we started with. So we're going to hear his shtick from a much more confident and certain perspective. Maybe even a potential, government official at some point. He knows that.
Hearing.
How did he
vaccinated.
respond to your messages?
There was no response. I didn't hear from him in 2 years. Until he taunted me to debate RFK Jr. There were a few reasons why I wasn't going to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I didn't want to send the message that science is done by a debate with crackpots. And who was ever says more clever things in a debate, that's how science gets done.
That's not how a science debate works. This is bullshit already. That Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would just say zingers, and that's why he couldn't win. They couldn't discuss paper by paper and figure by figure, or reference by reference, or statistic by statistic. Nah, that's not how science is done. We don't teach people. Students aren't allowed to ask questions in my class. Come on now.
That would be very dangerous.
You faced a lot of abuse during that time, harassment, anger, vitriol from.
He offered $1 million for him to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on a podcast, and he didn't reply. Yeah, he got a lot of shit for that.
The general public. What was that like?
I got stalked at my home by an anti-vaxxer, a couple of anti-vaxxers. It was very dark.
It was probably Larry Cook came over for dinner.
Very, very quickly.
Today I sit down with Dr. Peter Hotez, pediatrician, scientist, co-inventor of a $3.
And yes, this guy has gotten fat in the last 5 years as he's risen in his fame and fortune on the internet after interviewing Fauci several times about adding the COVID vaccine to the schedule, and after shilling for these people for so many years. Yeah, he's eaten well.
Patent-free COVID vaccine and the researcher anti-vaxxers love to target. In this episode, we peel back the curtain on how he was able to create a low-cost vaccine with the help of Tito's vodka. And without the help of Big Pharma. We get into the details between his public clash with Joe Rogan and what really happened when RFK Jr. tried to lure Hotez into a debate cage match with Elon.
And then I'll start it again. Sorry about that. Just have to advance it a little bit.
You have now a rough relationship with Joe Rogan.
Time to look it up. So it's become more sophisticated also. I mean, not really, but it requires people with more technical knowledge than the past to debunk it. You know, so for instance,
match with Elon watching for $100,000. Sounds like I'm making all this up, but I'm not. If you ever wondered how to fight misinformation without losing your mind or your funding, Dr. Hotez brings receipts, a few spicy stories, and a blueprint for keeping public health alive in 2025 and beyond. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Peter Hotez to the Checkup Podcast. I'm excited to speak. I've seen your work throughout all of social media, all the major cable stations. You've been a prominent voice in debunking a lot of misinformation, both online, offline, and on television. What are some of the lessons you've learned over these last few years as to how complicated it is to battle misinformation?
Well, it's, you know, Mike, it's gotten more complicated because the anti-vaccine movement has grown in sophistication. They've grown in political power, in money, and infrastructure. I
mean, Children's Health Defense had like 70 employees when I worked there. So yes, it's true. And they're doing $1 million matches, and it's true. They have React and React 19, and they have Door to Freedom. Yes, it's true. Bigger infrastructures to make movies and thumbnails. It's gross.
Kinds of pieces of disinformation that they're putting out have become more sophisticated also. I mean, not really, but it requires people with more technical knowledge than the past.
I remember the photographs of his birthday party on the boat with a bunch of girls in swimsuits. That was awesome.
Past to debunk it. You know, so for instance, you know, saying Bill Gates is sticking microchips into your vaccine, that, you know, most general physicians could debunk that. But, you know, when the Florida Surgeon General, Latipo, says mRNA vaccine.
I'm not bragging, okay? I'm kind of bragging. There's like a minimum amount of personal hygiene that somebody has to do in order to not have teeth like that. And that minimum personal hygiene, if you're not willing to do it for yourself, what does that mean for you as a doctor or a professional or a worldwide advocate for neglected tropical diseases? In my mind, it labels you as a fraud the same way it does if you go on a podcast with Zubaz and you start saying the F word all the time. It's exactly what Kevin McCairn did for 5 years while he kept Gigaohm Biological on his McCairn Dojo website as The Biology, and then went on stream after stream to talk about the Jews who had nigger slaves that worked for the kikes and the spooks and the whatevers. Because his goal at that stage was to associate himself with me so that I would be discredited through my association with him. And then when that didn't work, he went to attacking me to try and wave to get my attention. They brought Rixey into this shit. They brought McKernan into this stuff. They brought me to write in this book, for shit's sake. And then they brought Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into it, and then he couldn't sustain it anymore. And now we're here. And the vast majority of people still think that Tony Fauci's okay, Peter Hotez is okay. Almost nobody knows who Robert Malone is. Almost nobody knows who Kevin McKernan is. Nobody knows who Jessica Rose is, except for the people who needed to know. And that's nobody who watches Dr. Mike. There's a whole world of humans out there who don't know that we exist, don't know that the questions that we're asking exist or are even worth asking, because social media is a military trap.
Vaccines are causing turbo cancers because they're inserting nucleic acid into our genome.
No, it's because there's an SV40 insert in there, and SV40 is a contaminant in all the vaccines, and that's why we find SV40 in everybody's genome now. Come on, Peter, get with the program.
You have to think about that for a minute, and you have to say, wait a minute, there's no such thing as a turbo cancer. It's a made-up term, and mRNA lipid nanoparticles delivered the nucleic acid package past the cell membrane into the cytoplasm, but they don't get into the nucleus. For that, you need electroporation. That's why we have no DNA vaccines.
In order to get the DNA into the nucleus, you need electroporation. That's completely wrong. I don't know how much more wrong that could be. Electroporation is also to get across the cell membrane. That's wrong. So why would he be mentioning DNA vaccines and electroporation, Mark? Can you imagine any reason why Peter Hotez would mention electroporation and that's why we don't have any DNA vaccines? I can't think of any reason why he would mention that together in one stupid sentence.
And even if they did, we have proteins of our innate immune system that prevent incorporation of foreign nucleic acid into our genome. That otherwise, every time we eat a hamburger, you'd have cow DNA in our genome. But I have an MD and a PhD, and so
he just told us a little while ago in one of these interviews that it's the overcredation in medicine that's really. But I've got an MD and a PhD.
Stop lying.
Man, anytime anybody throws around, oh my goodness.
That's not so hard for me, but for a general physician, they're like, oh gee, I never heard that, and they need time to look it up. So it's becoming tougher and tougher.
Yeah, what strategies have you used both successfully and unsuccessfully in helping people better understand what's true versus what's not?
Well, I think, over the years, I've come to recognize that, people who espouse anti-vaccine views are themselves victims of a very targeted, predatory, often politically motivated
Exactly. Most of the people in the health freedom movement are victims of CHD, ICANN, and all the other people on that list, Brownstone, Hart, Panda. They are all paramilitary organizations present only on the internet, and their whole goal is to provide an endless series of hamster wheels where you will spin around in and the clock will run out while the rest of the world doesn't even know they exist. Nobody from the Brownstone Institute's never going to get on PBS NewsHour, I assure you.
The vaccine campaign very much linked to money and the health, wellness, and influencer industry, which is very corrupt, and so that's very important to try to be as patient as you can. And I think the hard part is you wind up repeating yourselves 1,000 times. I mean, how many times have
I really don't think it's crazy anymore. What I think first was suggested by Mark, that really what they're going to do is say that transfection doesn't really work with RNA, and we need to transfect you with naked DNA, that we're going to use electroporation to transfect you. It's not crazy to think. He just said that's why we don't have DNA vaccines.
Somebody online, whether it's through social media, through an email, will say, I'm a shill for Pfizer or the pharma companies. And how many thousands of times I have to explain, wait a minute, we made a low-cost COVID vaccine that bypassed the big pharma companies. We reached 100 million people with our...
In India!
The Texas Children's Hospital, in collaboration with India and Indonesia, showing proof of concept that you don't need big pharma, that you could bypass big pharma. So it's just the opposite. But you practically have to repeat it on a daily basis.
When you do say that, what's the feedback from the general audience?
Sometimes it's Rarely you'll get an apology, which is always the best.
Remember that the main ivermectin story was really from India, that somewhere in some province of India they distributed ivermectin and COVID disappeared. Also an Indian narrative.
Or they'll try to find something else to discredit you. You know, there's so much.
And that narrative was parroted by these people, especially Corey.
Garbage, you know, about me and my colleagues that's online. The one thing that's circulating says that I'm worth $35 million. And you know, I have to explain, no, you don't get a net worth of $35 million making low cost recombinant vaccines as a professor in an academic health center. It's nothing like that.
I'm curious about that. How do you go about bypassing big pharma in creation of a vaccine like you did?
Well, this has been my life.
Bypassing big pharma.
Stop lying.
That's like getting demonetized on YouTube. It's just bullshit. Bypass. Oh, my books were all banned. I have books banned.
Time dream. So I actually did my MD PhD in New York, not far from here on the east side at Rockefeller University and Cornell Medical College. And that's what I wanted to do with my life. Make vaccines, especially for parasitic diseases of poverty in low-income countries. And the hookworm vaccine.
He is the most goal-centered human you've ever met. Don't forget.
I started working out as an MD PhD student 40 years ago. Is now showing close to 100% protection in clinical trials. So that's really exciting.
That is really exciting.
And then, you know, we started making coronavirus vaccines because we got approached by a group at the New York Blood Center who said, hey, Peter, just like no one cares about your parasitic disease vaccines, no one cares about our coronavirus vaccines for SARS and MERS. And those were the two original pandemics back in the early 2000s. You know, would you work with us? So we did. And that allowed us to learn how to make coronavirus vaccines. So when the COVID-19 sequence came online in January 2020, we were able to pivot and make that.
But that's really not true, because we have video of him saying in Congress that they tried to make coronavirus vaccines, but they didn't work because of something called antibody-dependent enhancement. So he's telling a lie here already. It's a new story. It's a new narrative. You know, soon he's going to recall how his daughter has autism, but she's like 38 and has got her own business. It's just a joke to me.
We licensed it with, when I say we call it our Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development.
It's all scripted bullshit, ladies and gentlemen, with scripted bullshitters.
It's good, and we're doing this, and it's good to see you again. So, Vinay, good to see you. Sanjay, great to see you.
Just one more data
point. We're talking about root causes of diseases, and we are talking about one.
This is podcast number 5, and it was last week that they did this, and they're talking about the root causes of disease. What root cause of disease?
Potential root cause in particular, and that is the roundtable we just had on talc. And so we convened experts from around the world, and they came and educated us about talc, and it was pretty eye-opening, I would say.
It was. I have, you know, my association of talc was always baby powder, right?
Yeah,
and,
right.
you know, when a certain...
This is Sanjula Jain Nagapal, PhD, Associate Director of Policy and Research Strategy. Why? Why? That's Vinay Prasad, Head of Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Why? This is the head of the FDA, Marty Makary, a UK citizen and former employee of the World Health Organization. Why?
company was in the news a couple years ago, but I had not thought about it since then. And now I'm reevaluating a lot of what I consume now.
Yeah, I learned a ton, and I had not appreciated that it was used almost as an industrial lubricant in the tablets and pills of even commonly taken prescription medications.
Director of CBER, successor to Peter Marks, is this fake child, traitor to our grandchildren, with most certainly
hadn't appreciated that was the case.
The number 1, 3, 9, and 10 most common medications in the United States have talc.
in the pill.
In the pill or on the pill.
Presumably so that it doesn't get stuck when it goes through the machines that machine it or something.
The machine or to keep the texture of the pill.
I see.
And so 20 million Americans plus are taking talc probably on a daily basis on top of the talc that appears in food.
Yeah. Tell us about that. It appears in like gum or something.
Yeah, so I mean, it's crazy. So, I grew up, my grandfather would always like have gum in his pocket and have pockets in his jacket.
My dad would always have a certain.
So I didn't know this. I always thought if you like open gum.
Do you chew gum, by the way? Is that something you do?
I do, but now
it's okay.
I need to reevaluate
I mean, it's
this.
not smoking cigarettes. I mean,
It's like, as a kid, right? It was like this tree, and so I don't know if you can see it, but like this, like there's this white like dusting. And I always thought it was sugar.
I thought it was flavor. Yeah.
I thought it was sugar or flavor.
I assumed it was flavor.
But I think in most cases it's talc.
So it doesn't stick to the wrapper.
Yeah, to make it.
Talc is definitely, I don't know how frequent, but it definitely is used to prevent sticking when it comes to gum and candy. And it's been used ubiquitously throughout the food supply. So
doesn't this feel like winning? Aren't you so glad that we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the head of HHS? That we have Jay Bhattacharya at the head of NIH? Aren't you so happy that we have Marty Makary at the head of FDA and we have Vinay Prasad at the head of CBER? Isn't that exciting to have an associate director like that woman over there? Wow, am I happy.
Lollipops with the wrappers, they might have talc on one.
I'm so glad that we don't have any Chinese people or Russian people in our government, because then we'd really have a shit show on our hands.
Whenever you see that white powder, sometimes that is talc.
Well, I'm trying to look at the numbers and I was trying to quantify it, but it's really hard because usually it presents in trace amounts. So sometimes you don't see it on ingredient lists, and I think some places, in the medications, generic versions may be less like.
I wonder if those are real diamonds she's got in her ears. Probably not. Nobody wears real diamonds, right?
Likely to have it versus the branded versions, but then it could be something in like rice, and then particularly like in international rice, like basmati rice, probably is more likely to have it, which is why they kind of tell you to.
Or do you think an associate director at the FDA wears fake diamonds? Maybe she's just from a rich family in India. Who knows?
Rinse it, or at least my mom told me that when you cook the rice, you rinse it, and a lot of it, it could be the starch and the talc and
put in
other
the rice
things.
too, so prevent the rice grains from sticking.
Yeah, not all, but it helps with the preventing the sticking.
There was a study that is cited in this recent review from Stanford that showed that some of the rice, I think it was in China, was tested, and they found talc on the rice particles. So it's again.
I wonder if they're using PCR to find the talc.
Industrial lubricant. It prevents jamming in the machines and mass production of food.
Yeah.
And so talc is really kind of everywhere.
And makeup. I mean, it's probably in my foundation or something, and I mean, it's just everywhere.
And we've learned a lot about talc and the potential carcinogenic risk over the last.
Just understand that they're all being paid, and not a shitty salary. Our taxpayer money is paying for them to do this podcast. Paying for them to pretend like they're doing work. He has an office with his name on it, for shit's sake. This should make you so angry you can hardly breathe.
30 years or so, and it was historic. It was not well appreciated just a few decades ago that it could be linked to potentially human cancer.
Well, that's what's nuts, is we thought it was just in baby powder. There was a big effort to get talc out of baby powder, but we're eating it. And so what I learned at this roundtable, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that I think initially people thought that talc was carcinogenic because it also had asbestos in it. But then even when you look at talc separate from the asbestos containing talc, it still had a concerning safety signal. And you're going to say, and then there's still residual amounts we're ingesting.
And inhaling.
And putting on our face.
So
go ahead.
This all started in 1993 when the National Toxicology Program did a report, and they found, quote unquote, clear.
You ever baled hay? You ever worked in the garage or in the barn when they're baling hay? If you don't know what I'm asking, then you've never done it. But there are usually two basic jobs baling hay. One is on the tractor and putting the hay on the elevator, and then the other one, much more shitty job, is catching the bales of hay as they come off the elevator in the barn. Because in the barn it's hot, and in the barn there's dust, a lot of dust. And after an afternoon of sweating your ass off in hay dust, you come out of the barn and you can actually cough up mucus balls that have dust in them. And your nose is clogged with mucus that's full of that dust after hours of working in the barn. And so, we're inhaling talc. We're swallowing talc. We've got all kinds of defenses, physical, chemical, biological, that stop talc dust from harming us. To stop talc dust from harming us, unless we inject it, suddenly that bypasses all of that stuff. And I'm not suggesting that we should inject any dust from any barn or any dust from any of the manufacture of rice or chewing gum. But they're making a whole podcast about this. This is a big concern. It's a big hamster wheel, and it's traders that maintain it.
Evidence of carcinogenic activity in animal studies with talc. And then that spurred this series of studies that was reviewed. All the studies from 1990 to 2013 were reviewed, and specifically looking at ovarian cancer. And they found that there was a statistically significant association between talc exposure and ovarian cancer with an odds ratio of 1.3. So roughly a 30% increase in ovarian cancer. And in some cases, when there was higher exposure, there was believed to be an even greater risk of ovarian cancer.
So promoting the very correlative, probabilistic studies that are manufacturing fake facts. And the main problem with modern science, as if this is evidence for what he's saying. So in some interviews, he says he's going to change the way that we do things. And Jay Bhattacharya says he's going to change the way that they do things, but they're going to keep correlating. They're going to keep telling you p-values and odds ratios based on computer models and AI modeling, and it's all the same malevolent bullshit.
Now, ovarian cancer, I think, affects like 1 in 67 women. We now
Dude, there are few places hotter than a barn loft in August. There are few places hotter on Earth. You'd have to go to somewhere like Death Valley to find something.
generally believe it comes, the most common forms come from the fallopian tube.
Yeah, not the ovary itself.
And so there was a pathologist at this expert panel who actually said, I was looking at ovarian cancer cells after resection and could see talc in the ovarian cancer
tissues.
in the tissue.
Wow.
Then in 2019,
Associate director says, wow, to director.
there was a review of 30 studies that found a similar 1.3 odds ratio in its causing cancer. So it sort of affirmed the other review. And then in Taiwan, they did a study where they found oral talc consumption was associated with stomach cancer. And guess what cancers in the United States are going up in young people? It's the GI cancers.
Oh boy, here we go. We're going to cover the turbo cancers with talc and petroleum-based dyes. It's all the same bullshit, ladies and gentlemen. It's all the same bullshit.
With no known cause. Now, I'm not suggesting I'd be...
They are all scripted because they are all in place to make sure that transfection never is blamed for anything. That a novel virus is believed, that public health is believed, that virology is believed, that intramuscular injection is never
one thing
questioned.
I am confident of from everything I've read is that this RNA exists. You can capture it, you can sequence it, you can move it to other cells and recapitulate disease.
It's a spectacular commitment to that lie. That's all it is. You just have to believe in the virus and never question it. Believe in the piece